Momonosuke Part 2. Okay, this is going to be covering essentially from just after the end of Punk Hazard, when they are like on the Thousand Sunny heading off with the Straw Hats, up until when they leave Zoe to head back to Wano. That's what's going to be covered essentially in this video. So, what basically ends up happening is, of course, Kinemon is fine after being in the paralyzing gas from Caesar. He ends up being okay. Him and Momo have are part of the big celebration with like the Punk Hazard kids and with the G5 Marines and the Straw Hats and everything. They're part of that big celebration. And for Momonosuke, this is kind of the first time that he was allowed to, or that he's been able to kind of let loose a little bit since his father died and he was sent into the future, because essentially the short time frame that they were in Wano when they first arrived there, Momonosuke is having to get used to the act of calling Kinemon his father and vice versa. And then it's just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. They get separated from Raizo on the way to Zoe. They get separated from Kanjuro and Dressrosa. He gets traumatized more by Doflamingo and Dressrosa. And then he gets on the wrong ship and is taken to Punk Hazard, where he is trapped with the other kids. And all of that. And then, he eats the devil, the artificial zone, and he has no idea what is going on. And then he's trapped in the garbage chute for a while until Luffy shows up. And then, all of that stuff. And then he thought Kinemon died. And then, there's this moment of relief where he's like, okay, he's not dead, and they're reunited, and they're happy in that regard. And then he's finally getting to let loose a little bit with, enjoying the food that Sanji made, and then going through and, just kind of having fun with Luffy and everything. Kind of, the typical big feast at the end of the arcs that we've seen. But in this case, for Momonosuke, it's a little bit of this being able to, breathe a little bit at that point in time, which is nice for him. And for Kinemon, too, because it's kind of a similar thing there for both of them, where they're kind of able to just breathe. Then it's kind of time for everybody to head in their own directions. The Punk Hazard kids are going to go with Smoker and Tashigi to one of the bases, to the base that's near Egghead Island, so they can be treated by Vegapunk. Tashigi and the kids are going to go there, and probably some of the G5 Marines are going to go with them. And then we'll have Smoker is going to stay on Punk Hazard and work on saving the rest of the G5 Marines that were trapped in the Shirokuni gas and everything, and along with the Brownbeard's crew, and Brownbeard's going to stay there as well. And then the Straw Hats plus Law are going to be heading toward Dressrosa at this point in time. They have Baby Five and Buffalo, and they kind of have them hostage, and Law's going to set up his little trap for Doflamingo at that point in time. And so we have that. So Kinemon and Momonosuke are just kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they end up just kind of boarding the Thousand Sunny and staying there. And so this kind of ends up resulting in a little bit of we don't really have anywhere else to go. And I think Luffy is essentially just yeah, come with us, it's fine. So they're on the Thousand Sunny. And what ends up happening is, they're sailing off towards Dressrosa. And Law is essentially explaining to the rest of the crew, the connection between Doflamingo and Kaido and everything via the underworld connection as Joker and everything. And Momonosuke is surprised to hear about this, that this scary man that he witnessed at Dressrosa is connected back to Kaido, which causes him to transform into his dragon form. Which is the first time that Kinemon is seeing him in his dragon form. And Kinemon is just freaking out about this because, of course, we don't know this at the time, but, we find out later it was one of the reasons why Momonosuke is so kind of disturbed about being a dragon, and of course one of the reasons that Kinemon hates dragons so much is because Kaido turns into a dragon. Now, I don't know how many theories there were at the time when, before Kaido was revealed to be a dragon. I know, I'm not sure if there were theories that, like, oh, Momonosuke is scared of dragons, and Kinemon hates dragons, so Kaido must be a dragon once we found out about more of those connections. I don't know exactly if that was the case or not, back when that was, first being discovered, but that's what happens. So Kinemon is kind of freaking out at this, which is just kind of funny. It's a little bit of moment of levity that is definitely needed, amongst all of the seriousness. That of course results in, of course, not too much. Momonosuke and Kinemon are just kind of there in the background while Law is going over the, his plan to deal with Doflamingo. And then we cut to that evening where Momonosuke, taking full advantage of the fact that he is an 8-year-old innocent little child, gets to go and have a bath with Robin. Which, of course, results in Kinemon, Sanji, and Brook all being exceedingly pissed at him and jealous. And just threatening him, which is just funny. And then I love how that loops around back at the end of Wano with Nami. And everything. It's just like, no, he's a grown man now. That's inappropriate now. For all of this. And so there's some of that. So we have that moment there where just Momonosuke taking full advantage of this situation. And, snuggling into Robin when they come out of the bath. Oh, boy. And, of course, Momonosuke, I believe, gets to sleep with Nami and Robin while they're on the Thousand Sunny, much to his joy. And Kinemon, Brook, and Sanji's horror. So we have all of that going on there, so that's just annoyance there and everything. They guess, he gets his comeuppance later on, which is funny. But he continues to take advantage of this with, being this cute little innocent kid, in front of Nami and Robin and everything, even though, like, the others and the audience see just his perverted tendency. I'm like, he is 8 years old. I would put some of the blame for this on Odin, simply because, we know all about Odin's past and the harem wars that he caused. But in the case of him, he's like asking Momonosuke when he's like 8 years old what type of women Momonosuke likes. I'm like, he's 8. He shouldn't be interested in women yet. That's a bit young there, Kaido. Or a bit young there, Odin. And, Momonosuke is, buttering up Robin and Nami, calling Nami a princess and different things like that. And, getting hugs out of them and everything. And all of that stuff as he just grins wickedly at the other 3 perverts that are on the ship and everything. Not Frankie. Frankie's not interested in that, as far as we're aware. That's not at the top of Frankie's priority list. So we're having all of those issues going on. While this is going on, of course, the next day they have it that, or later the previous day, Law had the conversation with Doflamingo over the Dendenmushi while he was getting Baby 5 and Buffalo from, where Law had, trapped their heads, discombobulated them, deconstructed them, however you want to put it. And, making the deal with Doflamingo, it's like, I'll give you Caesar if you, if you resign as a warlord and everything. And all of that. So we get to the next morning, and of course, they're all reading the newspaper and seeing that Doflamingo has resigned as a warlord and everything. And that, it's announcing Law's alliance with Luffy and everything, as well as learning about the alliance between Kid, Apu, and Hawkins is going on at the same time. So this leads into the Dressrosa arc, where they finally arrive at Dressrosa. In the anime, there's the stupid Caesar retrieval arc where they have to get him away from Breed, but I'm going to ignore that because that arc is stupid. Although I like seeing a bunch of the animal friends again, that's fun. But they have the whole plan is, of course, for Law, Usopp and Robin to take Caesar to Greenbit to, trade essentially with Doflamingo and everything. Momonosuke is going to stay on the ship with Nami, Chopper, and Brook, and I think Sanji is supposed to stay on the ship as well. They're all supposed to stay on the ship, and then Luffy's group, including Kinemon, Frankie, Zoro, and Luffy, and then ends up being Sanji, are all going to go into Dressrosa to essentially scout things out. So they're all setting up for where they're going to be, and of course we're seeing more of the relationship develop between Luffy and Momonosuke, where Luffy keeps kind of teasing Momonosuke and is kind of starting to treat him a little bit more like a little brother and everything else like that. And of course, Momonosuke does not like how indignant and disrespectful Luffy is toward him, but he can't just come out and say, I am the prince of Wano. You can't do this to me. You can't treat me like this. I am not your personal steed for you to try to ride on just because you think I'm a dragon or an eel. And all of that. So, Luffy, kind of beats on Momo a little bit for just like how mouthy he can get. And then Momonosuke just like bites Luffy. So we have those. So it's like everybody's all getting separated into their groups. And on the Thousand Sunny, what ends up happening is, of course, the rest of the other two groups disembark and head off in their different directions that they're supposed to go. And we are left with, as I said, Momonosuke, Nami, Chopper, and Brook on the Thousand Sunny. And, Momonosuke is worried about Kanjuro's safety because, of course, at this point in time, they don't know that Kanjuro's the traitor, but you get the idea. And they're going through and just waiting, and they end up playing Shogun, as they say. Or Momonosuke is the Shogun, and then Nami is kind of like his, lap of luxury little one that's pampering him, and then Brook's supposed to, play music, and then Chopper's whatever. And of course it's Momonosuke being a brat, Nami allowing it because he's a cute kid and all of that stuff, and Chopper getting semi-annoyed with it. All of those bits there. And then what ends up happening is, of course, they start hearing these weird noises, and they're like, what is that? They hear someone talking and strange noises coming from the men's locker room, the men's room. So they're like, what is going on? So they go over and they open the door, and inside they find Giola, who is the member of the Don Quixote pirates, one of the just various lieutenants or whatever they are. And she has invaded the ship along with several of her subordinates, and she is using her devil fruit powers, the art fruit, or the auto no mi, in order to change the men's room into this abstract art. Now, side note, I do like Giola's devil fruit. As someone who just adores art, I would love to have this type of devil fruit, or just I can turn make the whatever around me appear how I wish it via art. Her devil fruit and Kanjuro's devil fruit are, as someone who is very art-minded, is something that I wouldn't mind having. Again, I don't know if I'd want to give up my ability to swim, though. So she also ends up zapping the crew that are there, along with Momonosuke, the group that are there, zapping them with her powers and turning them into art. And of course, because Giola is very interested in Picasso and impressionistic type art and different things like that, post-impressionism and different things like that for Picasso and different ones along those lines, that's what they take on the features of more abstract and everything else like that, is the way that she makes them look. And this results in, of course, we're kind of cutting back and forth, between this and what's going on in Dressrosa and what's going on in Greenbit and all of that stuff. Cutting around in that time frame. Luffy and his group are dealing with, meeting Fujitora, and then dealing with all of that stuff, and then Luffy going and joining the gladiators and everything in the Coliseum, and then, of course, Law, Robin, and Usopp are all off on Greenbit having to deal with like Caesar and trying to then deal with Doflamingo and all of that stuff for what's going on there. For what'll eventually happen there and then meeting the Tontadas. So it's like this is kind of like cutting back and forth with all of that information. As Oda's like jumping around in the chapters. And in the anime episodes. And when we cut back, Nami and the others are hoping to lure Giola away from their ship. So Nami's riding on her waver, and Brook and Chopper are in the shark submerge, and Nami has Momonosuke with her. Out of all 4 of these people, Nami is the only one who can swim, by the way. I mean, like, she could easily pour Chopper. I mean, like, Brook's light enough that Nami would definitely be able to save Brook should he fall into water, so that's not that big of a deal. But all 3 of them, that's a bit of a stretch to try to get Nami to have to save all of them. But they have the shark submerge, and Chopper and Brook are like using the shark submerge. So we're getting that. They're hoping that they're going to be able to lure her away from the ship, so that way they can... because she's, like, rendered the ship unable to sail by, like, transforming it with her powers and everything. Unfortunately, that doesn't work, and eventually they are captured by her again. And, you know, Momonosuke is just refusing to admit that they're in trouble and that he is fine as all of this is happening. Also, like, Law calls the group, and Momonosuke is, like, refusing to say that there's anything wrong because he doesn't want to jeopardize what's going on. Fair. Brave. Kind of stupid. That doesn't go well. Eventually, they do end up getting captured by Giola, and she has them trapped in, like, her deadly painting that will eventually turn them... It's designed to, like, slowly suffocate them in, like, 10 minutes or so, because it'll eventually just slowly turn them fully into artwork. Also, Momonosuke's head gets turned into a peach, because Momo is peach in Japanese, is the way that they're going with that. So that's fun. And so they're having all of this, and they're trying to figure out, and Brook's the one who figures out how to get them out of this mess. Brook, acting nonchalant and seemingly caring more about the art that was being created than his friends' lives, convinces Giola to restore his hands and restore his violin and his crane and his cane. Yeah, Brook now has a cane back to normal, so that way he can add the appropriate music, accommodate the music for the death of his friends and everything. And Giola falls for this because she's so used to people not liking her artwork and everything else like that. That, like, Brook complimenting and everything else like that results in, like, her falling for it, and she, restores his violin and his cane and all of that, so he's able to play properly. And then he uses his drawing song, Hito Yogiri, and is able to just, like, defeats her very easily, essentially in one blow, which, of course, since she's knocked out, that results in all of the stuff reverting back to normal for all the rest of them all around there and everything, and now they have Giola essentially as a hostage. And they're able to, completely incapacitate her, and, Momo is, like, proud that he was able to help with this. I think in the manga, he's, like, holding one of his, like, little fake training swords. So he helped, I guess. So we're seeing all of that stuff. And now they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with Giola. And it's just like, well, we can use her as a hostage against Doflamingo. Because, I mean, for all of the higher-ups that are like the executives and the lieutenants and all of that stuff that serve with Doflamingo, as long as they stay loyal to him, particularly for all the ones that have the, like, we saw in the flashback with Law and Doflamingo and everything, for all of them, we know that Doflamingo genuinely cares about them. We see that for all of the executives and for the ones that are below them and everything else like that. For the ones that are part of the family, of the Don Quixote family that he has built, that are the main members of the crew. The lower riffraff, he is much less concerned about. He's like, sure, whatever, you're fine, but you disappoint me and I'll get rid of you pretty quickly, as we see what happens with Bellamy. But in the cases of like Giola, Doflamingo does care about Giola, just like he does care about Baby Five and Buffalo and the other ones. So they're like, okay, well, how can we use her as a hostage to our advantage? Do you think we can use that? So we have that. And Giola, because of course they're also under the impression that Doflamingo is no longer a warlord, they're like, okay, well, that means that the Marines aren't going to help him, so we could always threaten to turn you over to the Marines. And then Giola proudly reveals the fact that no, Dofi didn't the young master didn't actually resign as a warlord. It's fake. It's a fake resignation. The government knows this and everything else like that, and they're still going to work with him. Which, of course, that lines up for when we get the twist that Fujitora is not there to capture Doflamingo, he is there to help Doflamingo and all of that stuff, and that's when we get the second edition of the paper that reveals that no, Doflamingo didn't actually resign, and all of that stuff, where we're getting that big twist there. To be fair, it's not that big of a twist, but you get the idea. And of course, eventually what ends up happening is Nami's group are approaching Greenbit, and they have to deal with the fighting fish that are attacking their ship. This also results in Doflamingo being able to come over, and his intention is to attack them and save Giola. Thankfully, Sanji shows up and is able to protect them in this time frame. Doflamingo does manage to get Giola away, or Giola's subordinates manage to help rescue her, and then they're able to escape because we see Giola later on in the Dressrosa arc. And of course, this is where it results in now the crew is being split up even further. Where we have Nami's group, now including Sanji, after he attempts to try to, he does manage to, stave off Doflamingo long enough for them to, escape. Which is good. And impressive. Sanji, Ifrit, Jambe, Sanji, and everything versus Doflamingo would be an interesting fight. At the very least, he would definitely hold up a lot better than he did last time against this. But Sanji, they're able to get away, and Law intervenes in this regard as well, using shambles and everything to put Caesar onto the Thousand Sunny and himself, and then he tells the rest of the Nami's group to head to Zoe, and he gives them the Vivre card that'll lead them to Zoe because it's connected to Beppo. I believe it's Beppo's Vivre card that that Law gives them. So they're gonna head off to Zoe. They're very reluctant about that. They don't want to leave because that's leaving behind half of their crew are still on Dressrosa. Robin, Usopp, Frankie, Zoro, and Luffy are all still on Dressrosa. But Luffy tells them to go because Luffy's part of this conversation, because part of this is also being they're having this conversation over the Denzen Mushi while a bunch of other stuff is happening. And of course, they head off. Nami's group head off. Law gets is grabbed by Doflamingo, fight, and then is he captured, and that's where all the rest of the stuff's going on in Dressrosa. For more information on that, go and watch any of my videos about King Rikudo III, Viola, Rebecca, Kyros, Doflamingo himself. Take your pick. Go watch those. They break down a good chunk of what else happens in Dressrosa. Shameless plug. It's only a shameless plug if you actually end up watching the videos. But what ends up happening is, of course, now Nami's group... so it's Law took Giola as a hostage to divert Doflamingo's attention from them so they would be able to get away with the coup de burst, which they do. Once they are far enough away from Dressrosa, they then, Momonosuke explains that he saw Doflamingo before and how terrifying he was, and they're like, yeah, no, we get it, he is terrifying. Thankfully, this also results in, during some of this time frames, they get in contact with Luffy and Frankie's group and all of this, some other varying things that are going on for other just communication across the board. And they're, explaining the true situation of what's going on in Dressrosa, that Dofi is still a warlord and all this other stuff, so that's what's going on there. And Sanji has decided that they're going to try to sail back to Dressrosa so they can carry out their assault on Doflamingo like they initially planned. Now, as the audience, we learn that, of course, one of the reasons why they end up getting split up is because Oda introduces all of these other characters that are the ones in the Colosseum that are the gladiators that will eventually end up becoming the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. But we don't know this at the time. It's like, okay, well, how's Luffy and his group going to be able to deal with Doflamingo in this regard and everything? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to view it, the Big Mama Shancer shows up with a bunch of the Big Mom pirates on it, and they demand Caesar, and of course they are able to, the Straw Hats, Nami's group, are able to escape. Ordered them to go ahead to Zou, on the Sunny, take the Sunny and head to Zou and everything. So they manage to get away from the Big Mom pirates, and they make their way to Zou, which of course results in giant elephant. Big. Essentially, they get there and they scale the outside of the elephant. I don't remember how they got up there in the first place. But they scale the outside of the elephant. They scale up Zunesh's legs and get to the top. And this is, of course, after Jack has gone and attacked the minks on Zou and everything, trying to find Raizo. And they end up saving Tristan, who is the one who is the nurse that works with Dr. Miyagi, the goat, from Sheep's Head, or Sheep Shed, depending on which way you want to pronounce his name. They end up saving her. Because, Nami's group are, looking around, and they're like, what happened here? Because they can tell that something bad happened, that they were attacked. And then they also end up interacting with Wanda and Kara, and this is where Nami and Wanda start to become friends, and of course where that friendship starts to develop. And what else, other things end up happening in this time frame. Momonosuke isn't super involved in a lot of what's going on here, but they get asked by the minks to help them. Wanda asks them to help, and of course they do, and they help with they force Caesar, and then Chopper, of course, willingly does it, make the antidote for the gas that Caesar made that Jack used on the minks, and doing as much medical attention to all of them as possible and everything else like that, to help the minks as much as they can. Help, Inarashi and Nekomamushi and all of them. And they do a lot. They help them. And, of course, it ingratiates them so much to the minks. And, of course, the minks tell them about Jack showing up and saying they were coming and looking for a ninja named Raizo from Wano, but we don't know who that is. We don't even, we don't know anyone from Wano. We don't know any samurai and everything. And we told them that, and they still kept attacking us. So, of course, Nami and their group are just like, okay, well, we can't tell them that we were sent by samurai from Wano to come here. Because at the very least, at this point in time, Kinemon and Momonosuke have explained that they are from Wano, that they are samurai from Wano, but they have not explained who they really are, and the fact of, Prince of Wano and Scabbard who guards him type of a thing. They at least know that they're from Wano and that they are looking for their companion, Raizo, who is a ninja from Wano. Which is enough information for Nami and the others to be like, okay, let's not mention that. So eventually what ends up happening is, they've ingratiated themselves to the minks, but Momonosuke is, he keeps getting overwhelmed because he can't mention anything about Raizo, and he keeps staying in his dragon form, so he's hiding from the Mink tribe in the little house that the Straw Hats are staying at, that Nami's group are staying at. And that's where he's staying. This, of course, also lines up for when everything happens with Sanji and Caesar being taken by Beji and the Fire Tank Pirates and everything to go and be part of the wedding. This happens during this time frame, and then, of course, we have it when the rest of the Straw Hats eventually show up. Where Luffy's group with law returned from Wano, or returned from Dressrosa, or arrived from Dressrosa, not returned, arrived from Dressrosa. And of course, you know, they eventually are, of course, reunited with Nami's group, and then, of course, includes Momonosuke and everything. Where, of course, as I said, Momonosuke has just been kind of like avoiding any contact with the Minks, because he doesn't want to reveal something that will be bad. And Momonosuke, that's why they explain, like, why Momonosuke isn't there when they first arrive, when they go and visit Inarashi and Nekomamushi and all of that stuff, or why he's not part of, like, the little parties that they have in those areas when they meet the dukes and everything. They just explain that Momonosuke is hiding away. Later, when Kinemon and Kanjuro finally arrive at the top of Zou, they get up to the city, and Momonosuke is reunited with them. Assumedly, like, Momonosuke kind of somewhat sensed that they must have been nearby, because he just, like, shows up at the city almost as soon as they get there. So he must have sensed them. Again, Momonosuke has the voice of all things, and he has really good, very early on, awakened observation haki. So he's able to, like, sense things like that kind of all work together in that regard. Similar to how, like, right now, or currently in the story, when this goes up, Luffy is able to sense things more in Elbath than he has been previously. That's a combination, possibly, of the voice of all things and his observation haki just getting better and better and more fine-tuned. We see similar things with Sanji and his, women radar and everything else like that. Damsel in distress radar. So Momonosuke is reunited with Kinemon, and then, of course, is happy to see Kanjuro and everything. And this, of course, results in, Inarashi and Nekomamushi and their groups all showing up at the city, because, they rang, like, the bell that's, like, for intruders, so they're all showing up there, and the Straw Hats are trying to prevent Kinemon and the others from revealing that they are samurai from Wano and that they're looking for Raizo and everything, and it just does not go well. And Kinemon does the big reveal of who they are, and the reveal of who Momonosuke really is, and all this stuff, and all the Straw Hats are like, oh, this isn't going to end well. And then we have, of course, the Raizo is safe moment, which I've already done a whole freaking video about, because I love that moment, where Inarashi and Nekomamushi and the rest of the Mink tribe reveal that Raizo is safe, and that they are welcome, that the samurai are welcome in Zou because of their friendship, and all of that. So at this point in time, Momonosuke steps up and he begs them to cease their quarreling. Begs Inarashi and Nekomamushi to just cease their quarreling, because it is a disrespectful and a dishonor to his father. And the two dukes just, like, apologize for this. They're like, okay, we're sorry, we won't do that, and we can. And this, then, to the Straw Hats, is when Momonosuke and Kinemon reveal that, no, Lord Momonosuke is not my son. He is actually the son of Kozuki Oden, who was the rightful shogun of Wano, but was killed. And Momonosuke is now, to the best of their knowledge, technically the last remaining member of the Kozuki family, which is the rightful ruling family of Wano, and that Momonosuke's father knew Inarashi and Nekomamushi, and that they had been, like, sworn to him. And the Straw Hats are like, oh boy, okay. And of course, anytime Luffy starts just picking on Momonosuke again, Usopp's like, you can't do that, he's a prince. And Luffy does not care. Luffy's like, screw that, I'm still going to make fun of him and tease him and everything else like that. So now we're going through and getting into more of, like, the heavy exposition and stuff that we have to get through for this part of the arc. They make their way to the whale tree and the whale forest, so that way they can find Raizo, and of course all of the, Momonosuke and the rest of them are just so happy to see Raizo and everything, and Raizo's angry at the Minks for letting so much pain happen because they were protecting him and everything. And of course, this is where we get the reveal of like the road poneglyphs, and Inarashi is like explaining them to Robin and everything. And, they reveal that there's this history between the Kozuki family and the creation of the poneglyphs and connection to Zoe and everything else like that. So, like, they're going through and making all of this, a bunch of just, like, lore dumping that is, like, good information that, like, we as the audience, it's helpful for us to know going forward, gives us a little more information, gives us a way of getting to Laugh Tale with the road poneglyphs and everything else like that. And so it's like setting up a lot of exposition dump. But we also have, Momo and his group are like they kind of see the damage that Jack caused in an attempt to try to find Raizo. And they're like, we can't let this happen again. And they're like, so we have to return to Wano and overthrow Orochi and defeat Kaido and everything. So we get all of that. And we also have the moment where Momonosuke and the retainers are giving, not the full, but a brief explanation as to what happened. That the reason Momonosuke and the others despise Kaido is, of course, because Kaido is the one who executed Kozuki Oden, executed Momonosuke's father, not revealing that was 20 years ago because time travel and reasons and a few other things that we're going to keep in our back pocket for now until it's time to fully explain them to you at the dramatic moment when it is time, when it is appropriate to do so. So what ends up happening is they go through and this is when they end up, essentially what ends up happening is, of course, Kinemon tries to ask Luffy for assistance, and Luffy says no. And then Momonosuke demands that Luffy assist, and again, Luffy says no. And, Momonosuke does request an initial, it's like, because what Luffy wants, because things that he has learned and stuff like that, probably some other stuff that he has learned from Rayleigh. Also just Luffy's pride, and also Luffy does like Momonosuke at this point in time. He's starting to view him as like a little brother at this point in time. And what ends up happening is, of course, Momonosuke trying to, order Luffy to make the alliance isn't going to work. But then Momonosuke sincerely humbly asks Luffy for his help. Because Momonosuke has been giving off this air of this very arrogant, spoiled child for the time frame that Luffy has been, dealing with him and everything else like that for the most part. And of course, having it revealed that he is a prince, essentially, the rightful shogun of Wano and everything from this lineage, that it's like, you can't just be arrogant. And like, that's, in a roundabout way, that's what Luffy is like trying to teach Momonosuke, but it's not Luffy's intention to teach it, but it's what happens. But Momonosuke is just humbly, with tears streaming down his face, on his knees, asking Luffy for help. And Luffy agrees. With this time, seeing Momonosuke's resolve, with Momonosuke being like, help us, help me do this. Help me defeat Orochi and Kaido and save my country. Please. And Luffy says yes. I don't know if you can hear her snoring in the background. And Luffy says yes. And this results in the forming of the Ninja, Pirate, Mink, Samurai Alliance, with, insert 1, 2 that applies to. Then there ends up being Zoe itself starts shaking. Well, before that happens, we kind of have that there's like a little other bit that ends up there's a few other little bits that end up happening. Law, of course, is part of this as well. He's part of the alliance as well, as are, the rest of the Straw Hats and the Minks and all of that stuff implied by the name of the alliance. So they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's our battle strategy? And Luffy's like, well, we got to go and get Sanji because he's definitely really strong and we want our crew member back and everything like that. I don't believe him for a second. For what's going on. So, Luffy and his group are going to go and get Sanji, and then the other group are going to go to Wano ahead of time and go deep cover and start learning what they can in Wano. And then, other ones are going to go, Nekomamushi and his group are going to go try to get Marco. And then, Inarashi and his group are going to stay with Zoe for a little bit and make their way to Wano and all of that stuff. So, they're working on that for what their plan's going to be. They figure out their plan, and then Zunesha starts shaking because Jack has shown up, he has returned, and he is attacking Zunesha. And Zunesha and Momonosuke have this moment, and Luffy too, have this moment where they connect, because this is Luffy's voice of all things and Momonosuke's voice of all things being able to understand Zunesha. And, it's like they hear the elephant's voice in their heads. And, the elephant is like, we are being attacked again, and showing Momonosuke that Jack has returned and everything is attacking Zunesha. And it's just what do you want me to do? Give me an order. And Luffy is telling Momonosuke, give the elephant an order, essentially. And Momonosuke does. He tells Zunesha to drive Jack away. And this, of course, results in Zunesha just, back trunking Jack's ship and causing it to sink. Most likely killing everybody on board who is not Jack. Although I still point out the fact that, follow-up order, stomp around on the ground and on the bottom of the seafloor to try to make sure that we, actually kill Jack. Although, they don't know that he's half fishman, so they don't know that he's not just gonna be able to survive underwater. How the heck Kaido's crew get Jack out of the water with so many of them already having devil fruit powers, I don't know. But they do. They managed to get him back. So they eliminate Jack, and then of course they have the whole additional bit where they're bandaging up Zunesha and everything like that. And Momonosuke is just so, he's like, how can I communicate with the elephant? How can I communicate with Zunesha? What is going on? And I think that's where we get the first mention of the voice of all things, where it's oh, your father was able to do that, to communicate with other things. So was Roger. And all this, and Momonosuke makes mentions of remembering Roger a little bit, and because that was 24 freaking years ago, the Straw Hats in Law are what is he talking about? He's too young to know he may know who Roger is from his father, but there's no way Momonosuke has memories of Roger. So they're what are they talking about? They're that can't be true. And I think Luffy's you're a liar. Something like that. And, Momonosuke's no, my father knew Whitebeard and Roger, and he was on both of their crews, and, all that stuff, but he doesn't explain everything why. And, I mean, by a technicality, that part of the timeline can still line up. Momonosuke could have just been born much later in Oden's life, and still, and he still would have been, on the crews of Roger and Whitebeard and everything else like that, and then was, telling Momonosuke stories about it later on, given the fact that Momonosuke looks like he's only 8 years old, and, stuff could have lined up that way. Plus, the Straw Hats don't know a huge amount of what was going on in Wano and, different things like that, because the news doesn't get outside of Wano very well. So they wouldn't know that Orochi's been in charge of Wano for 20 years. Same thing with Kaido. So there's that. So they're okay, so Momonosuke intends to kind of stay on Zoe for a little while to kind of commune with Zoe and commune with Zunesha and kind of learn more from Zunesha that he can, and learn to control his voice of all things a little bit more. So then it's time for all of them to head off in their different directions. Luffy's group gonna go to head off toward Totland to get Sanji. Zoro's group and such gonna head to Wano, along with Log, or like all of that stuff. And of course, Luffy and the others, you know, they say goodbye to Momonosuke and everything like that. So they're just, you know, all of that. And then they all head off in their own different directions. And that is the end of this one. So I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!